Today, we are going on an absolutely incredible journey. We're going to trace the history of one of humanity's most powerful inventions, writing itself. We're going to see how we went from just making simple scratches on a stick to literally building empires, all through the power of the written word. So let's start with a puzzle. What could a knotted rope, a drawing of a sheep, and the letter A possibly have in common? While they're all attempts to solve one of our oldest, most human problems, how do you make a memory last forever? How do you record information so it actually outlives you? That's the puzzle we are going to solve together. All right, let's dive right in. Long before we had anything like true writing, people still had to keep track of stuff. They needed to count their sheep, record debts, manage goods. So how on earth did they do it? Well, they came up with some seriously clever systems, what we now call proto-writing. You had things like tally sticks, right? Simple notches to count things one by one. But then you had the Inca, who took it to a whole other level with the quiqu, this mind-blowingly complex system of knotted, colored strings that could manage an entire empire's economy. It tracked everything from taxes to troop movements. These were brilliant solutions, for sure, but they all had one major limitation. And that's the big problem, right? A notch can tell you 10, but it can't tell you 10 sheep belonging to the temple delivered last Tuesday. To do that, humanity needed a much, much more powerful tool. And that tool finally arrived around 3000 BCE in Mesopotamia. It was the Sumerians who, because they needed to manage their growing cities and massive granaries, went and invented the world's first true writing system. And in doing so, they kicked off a revolution that was going to change, well, everything. Pretty much all writing, from those ancient Sumerian tablets all the way to the text on your phone right now, it falls into one of three basic types. You've got logographic systems, where a symbol represents a whole word. Then there are syllabic systems, where a symbol is a syllable, kind of like a single beat in a word. And finally, you have alphabetic systems, where a symbol stands for a single sound, like the letters we use. Let's start at the very beginning, with that first type. So the simplest way to write something down is, well, just to draw a picture of it. And that is exactly what the Sumerians did. Their earliest writing was basically pictograms. A little drawing of a sheep's head meant sheep. A picture of a stalk of barley meant barley. It's simple, it's direct, and it's perfect for keeping track of stuff. But what happens when you need to write about something you can't draw? Exactly. You can draw a sheep, no problem. But how do you draw belief? Or what about the concept of foreigner, or an action like running? This was the next huge wall that writing had to smash through, and the solution they came up with was nothing short of genius. So the Sumerians, and later a bunch of other cultures all on their own, came up with this totally revolutionary idea. They thought, what if, instead of using a picture to represent a thing, we use a picture to represent a sound? And that, right there, was the game changer. This brilliant idea has a name. It's called the rebus principle. The best way to think about it is like one of those visual puzzles, where pictures stand for sounds, not for the objects they show. This simple little shift was the key that unlocked the full, unlimited potential of writing. Here's the perfect example. How do you write the word I, as in me? You can't draw it, but you can draw an I. Since they sound exactly the same, the picture for I could suddenly stand for the word I. This incredible hack allowed writers to put down abstract ideas for the very first time. And that's the real breakthrough. With the rebus principle, writing was no longer just some fancy accounting system. It became a way to capture spoken language itself. Suddenly, if you could say it, you could write it. This was a massive leap forward. And, once writers started thinking in terms of sounds, it naturally led to the next logical step. They started breaking words down into their smaller sound parts, syllables. And that just made their writing systems even more flexible and powerful. And what's so cool is the contrast you see here. On the one hand, you have that early, purely picture-based writing. It was great for bureaucracy, 10 sheep, 5 pots of grain. But when you start combining those word signs with new signs for sounds, creating what's called a logosyllabic system, you unlock the ability to write actual prose. Suddenly, you can record history, write down epic myths, and create propaganda for your king. You can build an entire culture on the page. And it's not just a random path. As the linguist Florian Kolmes points out, there's a clear, logical progression here. It just makes sense. You move from simple pictures to signs for whole words, then to signs for syllables, and finally, to the most abstract system of all. So let's get to that final stage in our story, the alphabet. This was the ultimate leap in abstraction and efficiency, and it's a system that most of us use every single day without even thinking about it. And this chart just shows you so clearly why the alphabet was such a revolution. To read a logographic system like Sumerian, you had to memorize something like 1,500 different signs. For a syllabic system, that number drops way down to maybe 50 or 100. But with an alphabet, you only need to learn about 26 signs to write down every single sound in the language. It is an incredible, incredible leap in simplicity. The very first alphabet popped up around 1700 BCE, created by Semitic speakers who were living near Egypt. Their process was just brilliant. First, they took just 24 consonant signs from the thousands of Egyptian hieroglyphs and basically ignored all the others. Then, they put these new letters into a fixed order, our ABCs, and gave them simple names to make them easy to learn. The last piece of the puzzle, vowels, was added a bit later, creating the powerful, flexible tool that would eventually conquer the world. So, okay, we've seen how writing evolved, but what was the ultimate impact? Why does this ancient text still matter so much? Well, because writing isn't just about communication. It's about organization, and it's about power. And here's the bottom line. Once your society gets bigger than a small village, you just can't run it on memory alone. It's impossible. You need a permanent, reliable way to keep records, and that's where writing becomes absolutely essential. You could almost say that writing is the operating system for civilization. Think about it. It allows for a centralized bureaucracy to manage a huge state. It makes widespread taxation possible, which funds armies and big projects. It lets you create a single set of written laws, like the famous Code of Hammurabi, that apply to everybody. It lets rulers write the official version of history, their own propaganda, and it lets a culture create lasting works of literature and myth. Every single one of these cornerstones of a complex society depends entirely on writing. When you really think about it, this whole journey, from a simple picture of a sheep to the alphabet, it's the story of humanity learning how to organize its thoughts, and by extension, its world. Writing is the technology that lets us build complex societies, and maybe most magically of all, it allows us to speak to people who will live thousands of years after we're gone. Which really brings us to a final thought. We all have this ancient, unbelievably powerful technology right at our fingertips. We use it every single day to send texts, to write emails, to post our thoughts online. So the real question is, what are we going to do with it? What message will we choose to leave for the future?